Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Heiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. I'm Alicia Heiser, an astrologer, herbalist, and witch living in Oregon on Kalapuya land, and I offer astrology consultations and teachings aimed at helping you honor your most authentic self and trust your intuition.
I'm Lori Kaufman, an astrologer, tarot reader, writer, and teacher. I co-lead the Asteroid Special Interest Research Group for NCGR, an astrology organization, and I offer all different sorts of readings, online and in person.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Conversations with the Planets. And today we have our friend Matthew Oliver, the founder of Still Water Alchemy, with us. So, hey Matthew.
Hey, I'm super jazzed to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And today we're going to be talking about Orpheus and the mythology of Orpheus, what it means if you have the asteroid Orpheus prominent in your chart, and just a little bit about the Orphics. We could do so much about the Orphics, but just to talk about the Orphic hymns a bit. Um, and yeah, Orpheus is just this really incredible mythic figure from Greece who is like, was he alive? Was he real? Is he just myth? You know, it's kind of this like in between. Like a lot of
Yeah.
ancient Greek philosophers said that he was a real person at some point. But he's definitely like the level of a mythic hero as well. And it's commonly said that Orpheus was the child of Apollo and Calliope, but there's also some versions of the myth where they say Orpheus is the son of a king. There's different like lineages and parentages with a lot of mythic figures because myth is not like a hard and fast, this is right or this is wrong. It's like specific to the region and the person telling it. Like, I would personally love to know what the witches in the streets were saying about Orpheus, but we don't really have written record of that. We have like Homer. Um, but yeah, Orpheus was the first poet and an incredible musician. His father, Apollo, gave him the lyre, which was traditionally made from a tortoise shell with 7 strings to represent the 7 spheres, like the 7 planets, the 7 days, just the magic of the number 7, the sacred geometry of it. And Orpheus is said to have surpassed his father, because Apollo also is depicted with a lyre quite frequently, but surpassed his father in his musical ability. And he would travel and sing. In ancient times, like myth and poetry were sung, which is a beautiful way to like connect with like the bards would have been out there singing and putting this to music. Um, and he was just a very mystical, magical person who was very connected with the gods. And so Orpheus very famously, we'll talk about Eurydice, but he was also famously one of the Argonauts. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Um, this is him the on the ship with the Argonauts. And so he was one of the heroes with like the Jason and the Golden Fleece myth, which I'm not going to go into that whole myth, but he was there to play music, to help them row. You can see they're all rowing, and his music would help keep them to the rhythm. He famously helped them pass the sirens because his music was even more beautiful than the music of the sirens. So the Argonauts just focused on Orpheus and were able to pass the sirens. We'll get into Orpheus and Eurydice, like I said, which is kind of his most famous myth. But he also very famously had a lover named Callias, who was one of the Argonauts as well. And there's no chronological, it's not like Orpheus was an Argonaut and then he was with Eurydice. These are just kind of their own myths. And so the association that Orpheus was a very, very deep lover is like that shows up in multiple different ways throughout his different myths, and also the like gender and sexual fluidity of Orpheus, which is something that having a prominent Orpheus can absolutely represent in your chart. But Callias ended up being killed by Heracles or Hercules I don't remember all of the details of this part, but there was some drama of like I think they were stopped on an island for Hercules to see his lover or to run an errand. I mean, myth is very mutable. And then
Mhm.
Callias was like, we have to keep going and had the Argonauts leave. And so Heracles killed Callias out of revenge for that. And just like with Eurydice, Orpheus is just like very famously is grieves the loss of his gay lover. So he traveled with the Argonauts. He also very famously was with Eurydice, who was a nymph that he loved so deeply. And she was dancing in the forest and stepped on a snake and died. And Orpheus was distraught and overwhelmed by the loss of his lover. So that's another part of the mythology of Orpheus that is not guaranteed to show up if you have a prominent Orpheus, but that could be descriptive of your life experience of like the deep pain of losing someone you love. And Orpheus was so extremely distraught that he went to the underworld. He had his father Apollo help him, which very few living people do or did. And very few people leave the underworld. I think maybe a little later, Lori and I can share a funny story of us trying to leave. Uh, oh, what's the temple site that we went to
Oh, the
Demeter?
Temple of Ares.
No, the temple.
Oh,
Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank right now. It's so famous. It's where the Cave of Hades is, where the ancient mystery rites were done to like Demeter and
oh,
Persephone for,
Eleusis.
yeah, trying
The
to leave
Eleusinian.
Eleusis was,
Yeah.
we have a funny story. Like it's a lot easier to enter the
Oh,
underworld than
yeah.
it is to leave. But
Yes.
Orpheus somehow charms Hades and Persephone with his lyre and convinces them to let him take Eurydice back to the mortal realm as long as he doesn't look back at her until they get back to the mortal realm. And so then they fly up, through like the fourth and third houses in the birth chart. And then when Orpheus gets to the gate of Hades, to the second house, and he's in the mortal realm and there's daylight, and he's so excited, and he looks back at Eurydice and she's still in the shadow of the underworld, and he loses her tragically forever. Um, so that is a very strong, like Orpheus myth, one of the most famous ones. And then the last one that I'll share is that Orpheus is likely has Thracian origins, and he was said to have been traveling through Thrace and worshiping his father and worshiping the god Apollo and climbing up this mountain every day to greet the sunrise. And the maenads of Dionysus were both like so attracted to Orpheus and so like angered that he was worshiping Apollo rather than Dionysus that they literally tear him to shreds, which um yeah, they tear him to shreds, they rip his head off, and he continues to sing. And his disembodied head floats through the waters to the island of Lesbos, where it comes up on shore and becomes this oracular prophet. So, also having connections to oracular speech is a very Orphic way of being if you have that asteroid prominent. And then they like made a little shrine to Orpheus's disembodied head, and people would go and visit it to get oracular revelations, which is also a very Apollonian mode of consciousness. It makes me think of Delphi as well. And this is a vase painting of that, and you see just like a man bending over Orpheus, and then this is his mother Calliope with the lyre. Um, so yeah, what do you guys like? Either working with the asteroid of Orpheus or any mythology that sticks out to you about Orpheus? Like, what do you guys think about Orpheus?
Yeah.
I,
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say in one of the myths, I know that they were about to get married, Eurydice and Orpheus, and then there was all these bad omens. And then during the wedding is when she actually got bit by the snake, and so it made it that much more alarming or intense, or that grief-stricken energy is like it was during the wedding ceremony that this loss happened amongst all the people
Mm,
who were there to witness this immense act of love. So there could also be, if Orpheus and or Eurydice is present in the natal chart with the asteroids, that there could be this union that was almost there, or like a marriage of a partner, where whether it's like the music from the wedding or music in general or that kind of brief connection to music might be influential in that person's life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like to me, when I am talking about the Orpheus asteroid, at least, I think of the idea of grief being so strong. And there actually is a grief asteroid too. It's like the exact minute of my Mercury. Um, like the closest one I have. But I think that there's something to be said about like the grief taking you into an underworld journey and then coming back stronger or coming back just like with this intense, like even more grief, like even more sadness. Like it got worse, but you never stopped singing, right? You never
Hmm.
stopped creating. And it feels like there's this like expression. Something I wrote for my book about him is expression is survival. And that's been something I've been thinking about a lot is like, how do you live on? How do you continue on after something traumatic happens or ha after the grief? Like, how do you keep going? And you need to create. You need that like ability to keep going.
It makes me think too of like being at protests when people will start singing, like the cops will be like brutalizing people and then they'll respond with song. And just like the deep resilience and power you get from connecting music to difficult experiences.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and we have a whole episode called Asteroids 101 that's linked down below. So if you like want to go into the details of how to look up asteroids in your chart, what it means to have asteroids prominent in your chart, just like that whole technique. All three of us have attended a retreat with Demetra George about working with asteroids. The Asteroids 101 episode is just me and Lori. We were not blessed by Matthew for that, but that is a good resource to go kind of learn how to work with asteroids. And then, Lori, what were the numbers for Orpheus and Eurydice?
Yeah, I was just gonna add. So if you are looking them up, Orpheus is 3361 and Eurydice is spelled with a K instead of a C at the end. And it's 75.
And then I looked up if Callias had an asteroid. And Callias, I mean, there's multiple spellings because it's like Greek letters are different than English letters anyway. But the most typical one I see is Calais, and there's no asteroid spelled that way. There's one spelled Kalas. I don't know. Um, I don't know if that means Callias or like where that came from. It looks like it's a pretty recently named asteroid.
If
But
you
maybe.
truly if you truly resonate with that story and you look up the asteroid and it's in there, then go for it.
Yeah, and maybe in the near future we will be so lucky to have a Callias asteroid be named because they're constantly being named. So astronomers, give us a Callias asteroid.
Yes.
Especially because I feel like we're always talking about Eurydice and no one's giving Callias his due as a major, major love figure in Orpheus's life.
Yeah.
Um,
That is
So
interesting.
feel like that could also be an example of like, a prominent Orpheus in someone's chart could be someone who is gay, but maybe is in a relationship that appears to be straight because that's what their culture expects them to do. I feel like that could be a very Orphic experience.
Or someone who's bisexual. And
Mm-hmm.
then that was just an energy too. There was also this like Trixie and Katya have so much content, they're two drag queens. And it's like, why don't we just presume everyone's bisexual? Like, why do we always assume that
Yeah.
there's like why can't it's like everyone's bisexual until they state otherwise? As
Yes.
one like way of thinking about sexuality. And why is it that we have to presume one or the other? So if you had
Yeah.
potentially a prominent Orpheus, maybe you're gender fluid, sexuality fluid, like who knows how that may manifest, especially if it's close to or aspecting the ruler of the fifth or the ascendant.
Totally. Or the ruler of the seventh, which is
Totally.
I have Orpheus conjunct my Mars in Sagittarius, and I have an Aries descendant. And
There it
I
is.
am bisexual. And I will say, yes, I love that take because we kind of just assume everyone's straight until proven otherwise, which as a woman in a bar, I'm like, men, stop hitting on me. Like, if I didn't actually like look at you or indicate that I was interested in you at all, like, you have no right to just like sexually advance on me. So we shouldn't just be assuming everyone's straight. But also, like, we can have the starting point be that everyone's bisexual with the caveat that not everyone actually is bisexual, because that's also bi erasure. Like,
Of course.
bisexuality is still a very distinctive sexuality. So just putting that out there, because I feel like bi people are not given um, our due very often. Um, yeah, what other things could be prominent with like a prominent Orpheus in your chart? Like Matthew, you have Orpheus in your chart, right?
Yeah. So I have Orpheus very closely conjunct my natal Mercury in Sagittarius in the 12th pole sign house. So for me, it's manifested. People just really love my voice in general. Like
Mm,
personally, professionally, romantically, I get that feedback a lot. And I also do voiceover work, which I felt was very Mercury and Sag in the 12th anyway, but then adding in that dimension of being able to influence kind of like other dimensions and other avatars and other things was very loud. And also, I found too, for my mental health, when I sing, it just makes me feel so much better. And it's
mm,
always been the case. Like I worked at this one corporate restaurant. I was the only corporate entity I've ever worked at. And it was so brutal. And I was so depressed at certain points of that time in my life. And even when I was at work, I would just like sing when I was in the back room or having to restock whatever. And it just instantly made me feel better. So that could just be something as well. Like everyone can sing, obviously. And so if you have a prominent Orpheus, then perhaps you just being able to sing for the joy and the expression of it can help you feel better. And also you being able to use your voice or talents can also make other people feel better as well.
hmm. That's beautiful. I feel like it's also just so helped by that whole sign sextile to your Venus in Libra. There's like a lot of
Totally.
charming energy. Orpheus is a very charming figure.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, charming is a good way to put it too.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do find that he shows up a lot with creative people or people who um love to sing or are really good writers or poets of sorts. I have looked him up in some celebrity charts, but not many. But I do usually find it at least like making a prominent aspect to very personal planets. Um, but yeah, I have found like on the more negative side of Orpheus in the chart can be kind of like an inability to move on from things too, or like getting kind of stuck, or like creating a lot of like difficulty for yourself based off of like one difficult thing. It's like not letting it die, literally.
Hmm.
Like having to go back into the underworld and try to resurrect it, try to save it, but then not having the ability to trust, just like in the story when he goes back to the underworld to save her. And they tell him, don't look back at Eurydice. You have to trust. You have to just get to the top. You have to get out. And he couldn't help it. He looks back. And because he looks back, she's gone forever. She gets dragged back down into the underworld. And so I think there's kind of this aspect of like, you do have to have a little bit of blind trust.
Hmm.
And if you don't, then, if you keep checking on it, like a watched pot never boils kind of thing. It's like you can't just keep sitting there looking back and being like, okay, well, when is this going to happen? Sometimes you just kind of have to like make the manifestation and then just like allow and accept that it'll come, you know?
Hmm. Yeah. And now I want to share me and Lori's experience trying to leave
Yeah.
Eleusis, because this was so funny. We went, I was actually wearing this dress when we went to Eleusis, but we went on a pilgrimage with Jason Hawley and a bunch of other astrologers to Greece, which we did a really fun episode with Jason about the power of pilgrimage. But we visited this site, and it's this ancient mystery site where people would honor Demeter and Persephone and Hades and have this kind of underworld experience and revelation over a very extended, I think, thousands of years in ancient Greece. And so it's a very deep underworld site. And then after we were done there, we went across the street to get lunch. And our tour guide had gone to that place before with like a group lunch where they just pre-ordered, okay, there's going to be 25 people and we're just going to do this many salads and this many chickens and whatever.
Mhm.
But for us, it was just like this little cafe and we all just ordered our own things. And the place was completely incapable of being influxed by an entire tour group at once for lunch. And it took them so long to make our food, and we were just like stuck there way longer than we intended, trying to just like
They were
get
there
fed.
forever.
And it was so hot, which is also like the underworld, like the center of the earth is very hot. And then as we
We
got
were
on the bus and
outside.
left, Jason was like, well, in the myth, it is typically easier to visit the underworld than it is to leave. And we were like, guess so.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, encountering underworld experiences, I'm someone who has multiple underworld deities prominent in my chart, and then Orpheus is just another one. So, especially when you see multiple either figures from the same myth, or like I have Adonis and Ceres and Mercury, who's an underworld deity, all conjunct my ascendant, and my ascendant ruler conjunct Pluto. And those are all kind of in the same story except Adonis. But then I also have Orpheus conjunct my Mars, and it's like this multiple themes through multiple life topics that are influenced by underworld mythology. So that can be another thing, ancestral veneration, being a death doula, being someone who has just had a lot of experiences with death. I tend to view death as obviously a very difficult, sad experience, but also like the necessity of composting and releasing to create more life. And like my ancestors feel very, very close to me. Some of them actually feel closer to me now that they've passed than when they were in the living realm. So it can be, especially in just like conventional American culture, we really don't talk about death. We have a really hard time dealing with it, which is unfortunate because we all encounter it. And so if you have a prominent Orpheus in your chart or other underworld mythology beings, mythic beings, you might be someone who is more capable of encountering and working with that, like going to those places and dealing with death and helping others be able to manage their grief as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. Bridging that gap.
I'm just going to share this image because I haven't yet. It's Orpheus and a bunch of animals and his lyre.
That's a good point too, Alicia, with this photo, that if you have that placement, that there's a connection potentially to animals and to
Mm.
connecting with these other beings that are so connected and charmed through you. Like even for me, the 12th house can be hidden enemies. And I was grew up on an acreage and I got bit by our family dog twice. And I did not like growing up with the animals. But then when I left that environment and was able just to reevaluate my relationship with roots and with foundation and with safety, then I just grew a much greater appreciation with animals. And now living in Vancouver, you'll see like geese and ducks and like so many dogs and cats everywhere. And you're like, oh, like this
Mm.
is actually so much more soothing for my nervous system and my health and my mental well-being, being in connection with animals than it was growing up. So I think that could also be with 12th
Yeah.
house, also be self-care of good energy to note with Orpheus specifically.
Hmm. That makes me think. I was camping with my friend a few years ago, and I am now curious where Orpheus is in his chart. But we just like went up to the woods outside of Mount Hood and we did mushrooms together. And then my friend was like drumming and playing music, which is like a very, Orphic way of being. And he was noting how like depending on how he drummed, like different creatures would visit him. So like the mosquitoes really liked like some certain like rhythms, and they were like coming and like enjoying the music and not biting him. And then like if he played different drum beats, like other animals would show up, and it was something you probably wouldn't like tune into when you, especially like the tiny insects, like if you're not tripping. But I feel like that's like such an Orphic thing of like playing your music and attracting all of and my friend was like, yeah, I feel like if I just connect with the mosquitoes rather than spray them with a bunch of toxic chemicals, they're actually less likely to bite me. Which is an interesting energetic orientation. I don't know if that's true or not. I think your blood type and stuff also has to do with that. But, charming the mosquitoes with your drum beats could be an Orphic way of being.
Yeah.
Totally. Totally.
And then also, like when Orpheus was traveling with the Argonauts, he would make them stop and make offerings to the gods all the time and like initiate. There's like in general underworld mythologies, there's like this initiation that happens. And like initiating them into relationship with the gods, and like he was a very like pious, like we have to do these rituals. Like when he was torn apart by the Dionysian maenads, it was because he was performing ritual to Apollo. So that can be another thing as well. Like I have Orpheus in the third, and I definitely do a lot of like little altar planetary magic work. That can be a great way to just work with Orpheus. I feel like this also now segues into the Orphic hymns, right? Because there's like Orphism, which is like a whole like mystery cult of the ancient world, and we should just do a whole episode on Orphism at some point. But like the TLDR of it is that it's a very ancient Mediterranean mystery cult that has deeply influenced Hellenistic thought, like Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy. And so now, like, our so called perception of the West goes back to Orphic philosophy. So it's useful to be steeped in what that philosophy is. And also, a lot of older scholars on Orphism are just like so wrong and have interpreted it very inaccurately. And Kristen Mathis is doing some really amazing deep scholarly work on like really getting into the Orphic hymns and translating them and trying to like pulling up stellarium charts of what the sky actually looked like when the Orphics were, making their cosmologies. So I highly recommend her Substack and interacting with her. Particularly, there was the Derveni papyrus that has a lot of information about how the Orphics were worshiping and practicing. And that was not discovered until 1962 and not widely available to scholars until the 2000s. So we're actually in a very recent time where we're getting a lot more accurate information about the Orphics, whereas like older interpretations of them were a lot of assumptions. And particularly what the Derveni papyrus shares is that the Orphic hymns, which is a collection of 78 or something. I don't know exactly how many hymns, but several to the different Greek deities. So there's an Orphic hymn to Athena, and there's an Orphic hymn to Aphrodite that you could read on Friday, and an Orphic hymn to Kronos that you could read on Saturday. And that can be a great way to work with planetary magic or connect. I've been working with Artemis a lot lately, so I've been reading her Orphic hymn. But the Orphic hymns, the Derveni papyrus very specifically says that there's like meaning within meaning within meaning. There's multiple layers with like every single word, not every single, but most of the words they were using, there's like a very obvious literal meaning, but then there can be like reading between the lines, or like this word sounds like this thing and has like a double meaning. And so like Orphic consciousness and the Orphic hymns is you have to hide mystery traditions in plain sight, like especially when you get to the medieval era, which is way after the Orphics, but like, the church is not going to let you just be like writing like magical treatises everywhere. So like a lot of these like occult traditions are more like you have to read between the lines. But I feel like that's a fun way to think about, like if you have a prominent Orpheus or getting into Orphic consciousness, is like the double meaning, or like what's the meaning behind the literal words. And yeah, highly recommend Kristen Mathis's translations of the Orphic hymns as well, because she really tries to capture the essence of what the Orphics were trying to say with their hymns.
Yeah.
Do either of you guys work with the Orphic hymns at all?
Honestly, not a whole lot.
And Lori had messaged me about this episode and then about Orpheus and these Orphic hymns. And then just today I was looking this up. I'm like, oh, this is one of the best, like you said, uses of planetary magic. It's not that you have to choose them all because there's so many deities on that list for these hymns. But if there's one that you are feeling called to or drawn to,
Right.
there may be a specific reason, and then using that magically, intentionally, divinely could just really be a very simple but potent way of bringing this in. Alicia, I'm curious, do you do this like during the day, at night? You said on a certain days, of course, if it was like for a certain planet that day. But with Artemis, for example, if you feel comfortable to share, like, is there a certain time that you do it or whenever you feel called?
I have a Sag third house, so it's whenever I feel called. If
Got
someone
it.
had like a Saturn ruled third house or like a Taurus third house, they might want to have like a bit more routine.
Yeah.
But mine's just like very intuitive, vibey. It's also like if I'm putting on Sphere and Sundry oil, I will either read like the hymns that they have provided, or like if I'm putting on my Jupiter and Sag oil, I might just read the Orphic hymn to Zeus. So it really is just like when I'm in the moment wanting to connect with the deity. But yeah, you could do, especially with the seven planets, the deities associated with them, you could do it on the day or the planetary hour or both of the planet. Um, yeah, Artemis, I feel like you could do it during a lunar. Well, are there lunar hours? There are, yes. There's not lunar bounds, but yeah, you could do it during like a lunar hour, right? So you could intuitively kind of just read the hymns whenever, but what the hymns are as well is they're a collection of a ton of different associations with this deity from like across the Mediterranean and probably even farther. I mean, the Orphics and like ancient peoples were all pretty in communication with each other. So it's like if you're doing the hymn to Artemis or doing the hymn to Selene, it's like saying all of these different associations and really like praising this deity and describing them so that you're invoking them and you're like feeling their energy like crystallize around you, and then you have that space to like go do your lunar magic or even just like sit with a candle and be like, what is the moon, it's almost a full moon right now when we're recording this, like doing the Orphic hymn to Selene and just being like, what does the moon have to say to me? It can be a great way to get into that sort of consciousness and just like attune yourselves better to the energies. And as far as translations, Kristen's are great. She doesn't have her book out yet because she's like doing them so thoroughly that she's really taking her time. Sarah Maestros, I really like her book. It's more like modern, kind of whimsical. Like it feels very applicable to what it's like to live in the 21st century. And then Athanakis, I am so sorry if I'm saying his name wrong, but it's a name like that. He also has translated the Homeric hymns and probably other stuff. He's Greek, so that's like a pretty true to the original text translation. So those are some to like explore for folks who are interested. But yeah, Orphic hymns are just they're a pretty easy way to get into the mindset of the deity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would also presume that if people were curious about Orpheus in their chart, but it doesn't make any direct conjunctions or aspects, like the power of music wherever Orpheus is specifically in their chart. So if it's in a third or ninth, maybe when you're traveling or wanting to manifest travel, then having music that puts you in that mindset to attract more travel would help. If it's in like the first house, having like that main character soundtrack playing to cultivate more personal autonomy, like I feel like that would be also a very potent way because we talked about it like in our significance in our charts, but just in general, I feel like that would be a really great way of using this and seeing
Yeah.
how that amplifies that part of your chart.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I actually want to shift over to Eurydice a little bit too.
Yes.
Because I had really gone back and revisited my notes. I've been hyperfixating for the past week or two on restructuring my book again. And so it's been bringing up, old things that I wrote 2 to 3 years ago. And Eurydice is actually one of the first ones that I like really did a deep dive into and then kind of just didn't revisit. And so I was restructuring her yesterday, and then I spent a little bit of time with it this morning. And I just think it's kind of funny because to me, she kind of represents this almost like lost story, like lost person in somebody else's story. Like
Hmm.
she feels like she probably had her own life, her own stories, but it kind of just feels like another one of the women who were just like, you can't hear her story or you don't hear her story without Orpheus. But Orpheus had multiple other things to say about him. And so I've been sitting with her like, well, what, like, I don't want her to get lost in this story either. And I just feel like there's this energy of like, well, what if she didn't want to be saved in the first place? Or, what if she was idolized so much by him and his music and just being a muse? but what if she didn't want to be this muse?
Mhm.
And I've thought about her a lot as kind of like a representation of like being kind of just like somebody else's idolized person, or just
Mm,
like this figure of everyone loves her, everyone looks up to her, but who is she really? And there's kind of this like weird mystery to her energy. And I feel like speaking on the asteroids of how they can manifest, I think it's really interesting to look at how they play out together in a chart. I have them conjunct in my seventh house, close-ish to my descendant. Um, but I wonder if there's like in synastry how this could play out, especially in
mhm.
couples who deal with things like this. Um, or like women or just people I guess who get pushed aside in their relationship, and the other person kind of gets away with things. um
It makes me wonder like where Eurydice is in like Jackie Kennedy's chart, right? Or someone
right,
who so much of their identity and what they're known for is their partnership.
exactly,
Um,
right, that's the
yeah,
point I'm trying to make.
totally. Or having people, like you said, but I'm just gonna restate like
Yeah,
idolized versions of you projected on you, where someone just like sees like they have this like rose-colored glasses view of you and they just see you as the best, but then it doesn't actually allow you to be you.
right. And I think their story is so interesting too, because like she dies and then he goes into the underworld and does X, Y, and Z and goes through all these hoops just trying to save her. She didn't ask for that. She didn't want to be
Hmm.
saved. She was probably fine down there. And then all of it, he finally gets her. He finally succeeds. They're on their way up, and then he didn't trust and he turns around, sending her right back in.
Yeah, it's like
And it's
yo-yo.
like,
He just took her on her
exactly
journey.
like you just took her on a journey she probably didn't even want to be on in the first place. Like,
Hmm.
leave her
Well,
alone.
and the myth, I mean, yeah, there's so many ways to read it. So there is that way,
Of
and then like
course. Right.
there's another way where maybe she did want to be saved, but
Of course, of course. And there's so
yeah.
much nuance to it always. Um, but yeah, I'm always curious like what would her perspective be in
Hmm.
situations like that.
Which also, like, there's a Netflix show called Chaos, like
Yeah, I
Kaos,
was thinking
that
about that.
tells the like a modern version of this story. And yeah, from the beginning, I won't share like how it all goes, but in like the first episode, you see that Eurydice isn't actually like she's kind of contemplating breaking
Leaving.
up with Orpheus and leaving before she dies, and then and it takes place in like modern Greece with like I think they're like British. I don't know. It was a pretty good. My issue with that show is there are six Olympians. There's Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, the guys, and then there is Hestia, Hera, and Demeter. And the only female Olympian that was there was Hera as Zeus's wife. And I'm like, where's Hestia? Like, why does Poseidon get such a big role in this show? And then Hestia and Demeter like don't even have actresses playing them. But it,
Persephone
yeah,
was there though.
Persephone was great.
She was great.
Um, the Underworld, yeah, it's
But yeah, I agree.
worth watching if you enjoy TV and you want like a modern reimagining of this myth. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that show might have had a little bit to do with why my mind has kind of gone there in
exactly.
her yeah, in her interpretation. But I do think about things like that. Like we hear these stories over and over, but you often will only hear certain characters in context of other people's stories and
And well,
makes you
especially the
what is hers.
women in the stories
Exactly.
tend to be really connected to the men because ancient Greece was a very sexist place. The people who could write things down were perpetuating that. Again, what were the witches in the streets saying about Eurydice?
Right.
We can only
Like,
imagine.
right.
And this
Um,
can also be too, like, we hear the phrases hell or high water, I go to hell and back for you. So if you do have a prominent Eurydice,
mm,
and let's say it's in your fifth house, conjunct the moon, so maybe you have that relationship where you would go to the depths of like a really extreme medical treatment and pay all these bills, like drain yourself, go to like the depths of your own underworld to like save your child. And maybe in this case, like Eurydice did want to be saved, right? And like not to look back at all the financial torment that you're paying on your child's hospital bills, but being like, we're just going to keep moving forward and know it's going to work, to not look back, to kind of quote unquote finish up the myth. Because then again, that's why I like the asteroid so much and the story of myth, because we all have a retelling of this, and thus the
Mhm.
stories we tell to ourselves and that we get to enact here in this timeline. So if you do have a prominent Eurydice, it's like, where do you maybe want someone to go to hell and back for you that they would literally sacrifice everything, go against Hades and Persephone, do everything that they possibly could to save you if the need arose?
Yeah.
Totally. And I will say, having Orpheus conjunct my descendant ruler, as well as just having my Venus conjunct Pluto, like my relationship, like my romantic seventh house relationship is like a undying love story, right? And that could totally be like an Orphic way of like just like this deep devotional, you would do anything for your love.
Yes.
Um, just want to make sure that's mutual and that the other person wants
Right.
that.
Exactly. I think that's the actual moral of the story.
Totally. And yeah, thank you for giving Eurydice a bit more of a voice, Lori, because yeah, she
It's
doesn't.
beautiful.
Um, yeah, and another interesting thing about the Orphics is that they were buried with these golden lamellae tablets that were very specific instructions for navigating the underworld. And like when you reach the Spring of Forgetting, which Lori and I visited the Spring of Forgetting and the Spring of Remembrance, we didn't, it's like they're like literally under the earth and like not a site anymore. So we didn't
Yeah.
actually go into like do like the ancient mystery initiation that people would have been doing, but we were at the site, which is very significant. But the Orphic like lamellae say like don't drink from the Spring of Forgetting, drink from the Spring of Remembering, and when you go get here, like go to the right, and like the directions for navigating the underworld. And then when you get to the throne room of Hades and Persephone, and they ask who you are, you're supposed to say that you're a child of earth and starry sky, and you're supposed to acknowledge your connectedness to all that is. That was a very big part of the Orphic teachings, is that we live in this major interconnected cosmology and world where we are um, influenced by the stars and the earth and each other. Um, the one is the all type orientation, which is very interesting because then we have Platonic philosophy and things taking us more into like a dualistic perspective that they were inspired by the Orphics, but then they kind of like flatten it too. So redimensionalizing it. And then when you would tell Hades and Persephone, and you knew who you truly were, that you were connected to all that is, then you were able to join the circumpolar stars that never set and join the eternal divine ones. And then those of us who drink, all of us alive here right now, have in the past drunk from the river of forgetting and not told Hades and Persephone who we really are. And so then we have to reincarnate in this world to like learn who we really are. And the Orphics definitely had an orientation that like joining the circumpolar stars was preferred to like coming back on Earth, which I'm not sure if I agree with that philosophically, but again, the underworld associations and very like it's just fascinating. You can look up these golden lamellae tablets that people like they have found in Orphic tombs that are just very specific of how do you navigate the underworld. So that can be something to meditate on too. I mean, I already kind of spoke to that with like being more comfortable with death or things. But if you have a significant Orpheus in your chart, you might just kind of metaphorically know how to navigate the underworld, which can be helpful to others.
Yeah. I also want to reiterate transits.
Hmm.
Um, because I just looked and I noticed that Orpheus is 1 degree away from my MC and Eurydice is 1 degree away from my ascendant, as
Hmm.
we're talking about her, or both of them. So, I do think because sometimes you'll have these moments of like, oh, I'm really resonating with this story right now, and then you'll look and they're not actually prominent in your chart, or you don't actually have them, and that can feel kind of confusing. I've had many moments like that where I've looked up somebody thinking that they were going to be exact and they weren't. But then if you look at their transits, they often are transiting something that might be the reason why you might be resonating with it or talking about them publicly.
I love that.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Well, should we wrap up? Any final thoughts about Orpheus or the Orphics?
Yeah. I don't think so.
No, I think like Lori. does a good practice, which I hope it's okay that I'm talking about this, but like
Of
you
course, yeah.
ground in, like grounding in with the story and seeing what that myth or that deity is actually speaking to you. So you're not just giving your autonomy away to an astrologer or a human or a guide or a teacher talking about it. It's like, yes, this is one version, but like you said, Alicia, like there are so many variants and so many delineations and so many translations that you might have your own resonance. Like for me, it is that like hell or high water, I would do anything to come rescue. Where Laura's like, did you want to be rescued? So even for both of
Mhm.
us, there's different ways that we interpret this that are going to be based on where they are in our chart as we interpret them, as we move through life's events. So that's my recommendation, especially with myth and asteroids and understanding this in relation to your natal chart is how does it resonate for you and allowing it to speak through you and allowing that voice to change or have a different version or a remaster that comes out of different parts of your life.
Yes. And Jason Hawley teaches, that for those of us who come from a Judeo-Christian background, we can really interact with deities in a way, or deity or God or whatever, the higher power, in a way where it's like this top down, we must submit to the God or gods. Whereas a lot of more like relational, land based versions of spirituality and religion are much more relational, where it's like, okay, we're recognizing that these deities are larger powers than us and we're being respectful and acknowledging the influence they can have, but we're not just like prostrating, submitting, or like I was raised Catholic and we were just like kneeling all the time in church, right? It's like we don't need to just like prostrate ourselves to the gods. Like we can be in relationship and conversation and be like, okay, well, this part of Orpheus singing and being resilient and like worshiping the gods and being connected to these higher powers, that feels really resonant to me. But I don't want to get stuck in the grief, and I have the choice around that. And as we always say in our asteroid stories podcasts, like just because you have this asteroid prominent in your chart does not mean your lover is going to die, right? That does not condemn you to like the saddest or scariest parts of the myth happening. As we, I think, at this point have made pretty clear, there's so many different ways the myth can come through, and so many ways we can read between the lines and make it relevant to modern life.
Yeah.
So yeah, be in relationship with it. Don't just let the story overwhelm you.
Amen.
Yeah, could you imagine doing that with 20,000 asteroids?
Yeah.
Oh,
Awesome. Well, if anyone has Orpheus or Eurydice, or like, I mean, the Argonauts, there's so many other stories that tie into this. Hades, Persephone, like any of these asteroids prominent in your chart, like please let us know how that shows up for you. Like comment below or reach out on Instagram, or Lori is perpetually like capturing asteroid stories, so you can always share those with her.
wow.
But yeah, Matthew, what? And then everything for how to engage with Matthew and me and Lori are down below as well. But yeah, Matthew, like what are you up to? How can people keep interacting with you?
Yeah, all my socials, the handles at Still Water Alchemy. I have an online membership platform called The Alchemy Point. There's many, many different astrological resources, including all the astrological transits of the week ahead. So I go day by day. There's monthly challenges, there's live events to connect and get that one-on-one support through me or through community. So if you're looking for some extra cosmic and astrological goodness, you can find me there at The Alchemy Point, which is on my website as well.
I love that. And what about you, Lori?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always doing readings and that kind of stuff. I finally started a Substack for my writing, and I've been deep in editing and writing mode. So that's been kind of where my focus has been recently. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to finally create a space where I can post my stories. And then there's going to be a paid version as well under a paywall where you can access different ways to interpret the stories, a little bit more of their myths, and just like ways to work with these energies, deities, journal prompts, those type of things, rather than just the stories of how I've seen them play out.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
And you,
Um,
Alicia, tell us more.
yeah, I am hosting a Moon Phases retreat outside of Roseburg, Oregon on July 19th. of 2025. So if you're listening to this episode before then, you can come join us for that. It's along the Umpqua River, and we'll be really digging into the power of the moon phases in our charts and how to work with the shifting moon in the sky and blending herbal teas and doing yoga and ecstatic dance. And then, other than that, all three of us offer astrology readings, put out a lot of just like informational content about astrology. I talk about herbalism and, herbal supports and lifestyle supports to deal with different transits. So, yeah, definitely engage with all of us down below. And thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for having me, girls. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any personal stories to share or thoughts and reflections about what we discussed in this episode, please comment down below or reach out to us on Instagram. And please come follow us on Instagram at ConversationsWPlanets, where we share forecasts and updates about the astrological movements happening in the sky, as well as updates about our episodes. The link to our Instagram is in the show notes down below.